This is our 5th time.
I wouldn't have dreamt of what I learned here.
This encourages you and inspires you, and it's so relaxing, and the food is great.
I love Retreat at Sea, and I will do it again.
And you should be here.
Holy Trinity is at work full time here.
Turns out the Pope's top theologian, Cardinal Victor Fernández, well, he wrote multiple books using what abuse survivors are calling the language of groomers. Join us with the latest from the Eternal City, Church Militant Rome correspondent, Dr. Jules Gomes. Jules, the Vox Pope Francis says guarding the Catholic hen house to keep right teaching and right practice, orthodoxy and orthopraxy. Well, this now infamous Cardinal Victor Fernández, he was recently distancing himself from that book, the Porno Theology book, The Mystical Passion, which the media was dubbing Porno Theology. But turns out Fernández has a track record of writing multiple books with similar language that's not only upsetting Catholics around the world, but also upsetting sexual abuse victims as they see the language in there similar to what the language is used by sexual groomers. What can you tell us about these books?
Brad, people are now saying that Cardinal Victor Manuel Fernández seems to have a passion for writing what they are calling porno theology. First, it was Heal Me With Your Mouth, the book on kissing, and then we discovered he had written The Mystical Passion. You can see it in the graphic we have just put up there. And this book was pretty, unpalatable, to put it mildly. Now, Cardinal Victor Manuel Fernández, remember, was the ghost writer of Amoris Laetitia, and Professor Michael Pakaluk, who is one of the top Catholic ethicists in the world today. He's professor at the Catholic University of America. He is telling us now that Amoris Laetitia was lifted from an article Cardinal Fernández had written in 1995 for a Buenos Aires theological journal. But hold on, Pakaluk has also discovered that Fernández has penned a number of other pieces which are pretty pornographic in their content and clearly step over the line of Catholic permissible morality.
Now, before going on here, we'd like to state that viewer discretion may be advised owing to some rather graphic language expected to be forthcoming. So with that being said, Jules, for the sake of the story here, so viewers can understand the gravity of the content, can you cite some of the graphic topics and language Fernández has used as a 40-some-year-old priest when he wrote these books?
Well, the book that he wrote on, the mystical passion is all about orgasm, experiencing God through orgasm, sexual orgasm. And he talks in that book very graphically about male orgasm and female orgasm. And the big question is, how did he know all this as a celibate priest? But then he goes on to describe the woman's orgasm in such graphic and meticulous detail that it just leaves one, scandalized. But the Fernández doesn't stop there. As Pakaluk points out, he, in a 1999 article called The Mysticism of Tending to Another, he says that a life of grace, I'm quoting, can coexist with actions which are objectively evil, yet for which a person is not fully responsible. And he then, hijacks the Holy Spirit to say that there can be a genuine gift of oneself to another in which the procession of the Spirit is prolonged together with a beautiful sapiential experience, but coexisting with ethical defects. In another article Pakaluk has discovered, he says that sexual action outside marriage may not be guilty and therefore does not deprive someone of the life of grace. And then, even worse, Pakaluk says that he ends his article with a very good illustration. He says, okay, suppose a man was sexually abused as a boy. He then goes on to become a priest and then sexually abuses others. Does he still remain holy? Well, according to the logic, the theological logic adopted by Cardinal Fernández, this person would not be in grave sin. This priest would not be committing grave sin. He would still be, in tune with the Holy Spirit within the ambit of grace, and is actually almost tantamount to be holy.
So these writings now that have surfaced now, apart from the Mystical Passion and these others that you mentioned here, were they included in the Vatican's list of books officially authored by Fernández?
Disturbingly, no. He submitted a very long list of his books and his articles, but these books were not included. And then there was then a controversy about, did Pope Francis know? And in a recent interview, a couple of weeks ago, Fernández said that Pope Francis knew about the Mystical Passion, which is the most, pornographic of all his writings. And despite knowing about that, Pope Francis asked him not once, but twice to take over as prefect of the dicastery for the doctrine of the faith.
So let's move back to the content now. What are sexual abuse survivors, people who've been victimized by clerics, and how are they saying these books? What's their take on the book blending theology and graphic sexual content?
Well, that is really tragic. You're talking about zero tolerance at the highest levels of the Vatican. And remember, the dicastery for the doctrine of the faith, after it is has been split into two, it not only looks after doctrinal content, but also discipline of sexual abusers, clerical sexual abusers. And we know that Fernández was also hammered when he just got the job, because he was accused of covering up clerical predators in his own diocese. So, Faith Hakesley, she told our Sunday visitor this week, she's a victim of clerical sexual abuse, and she said it brought a lot back from my own abuse, because some of the things I read were similar to what my rapist would say, sort of combining abuse with things of a spiritual nature. And she also went on to say that his book does suggest both spiritual and sexual grooming. And she also talks about now how Fernández, in defending himself now, is simply gaslighting and saying, well, everyone else is misinterpreting it, so that's their problem. Now, remember, Brad, that people like Jean Vanier and Father Philippe Dominique, who abused 90 women, and then, of course, Father Marco Ivan Rupnik, who abused over 25 nuns, all of them were accused of using this sort of sexual, spiritual theology to groom and then abuse their victims.
Yeah, no one here is accusing Fernández of being a groomer, of course, but the language pattern they're identifying has been used by sexual groomers, clerical sexual groomers. Now, they say personnel is policy, Jules, and so in hindsight, it seems understandable, really, why Cardinal Fernández would call for priests, in fiducia supplicans. He would call on priests to bless couples living in sin, based on all of his past writings. Another cardinal now, because of that call to bless couples living in sin, is actually saying Fernández really ought to step down. Can you speak about that for a minute?
Well, yesterday, Cardinal Joseph Zen, this very honorable 95-year-old cardinal, who stood with persecuted Chinese Christians for decades and never compromised an inch. With great sorrow in his heart, Cardinal Zen called for Cardinal Fernández to resign. And he said this. He said that he explained why he was calling on him to resign, because he said Cardinal Fernández has now committed heresy. Why has he committed heresy? Because he's attributing intrinsic goodness to what is a grave sin. And let me read a quote from him. Zen says, "This is absolutely subjective error. According to the objective truth, this behavior is a grave sin." He's referring to homosexuality and can never be good. Very careful analysis there from Cardinal Joseph Zen.
Yeah, and of course, Church Militant is not accusing anyone of heresy. We're reporting what Zen was saying, but that was also very similar to what Cardinal Sarah was saying. He was throwing that word, same type of reasoning around. And I would just say in Fernández's defense that the document's so all over the map, it's kind of a Rorschach inkblot test. You know, phrases here, and you can pick and choose and cherry pick how you want to work your way through it. And so there has to be some semblance there of keeping in line with the Catholic faith, although it can be too easily misunderstood. Personnel is policy, so when you get someone seemingly so obsessed with sex that he writes what's dubbed porno theology by mass media, it's understandable that how he views couples living in sin really might differ from someone like Cardinal Zen or most of Africa, for that matter. Pray that we get the church leaders we so desperately need, rather than getting the ones we so richly deserve. Jules, thank you so much for bringing us up on the backstory and connecting all the dots for us.
Thank you, Brad.
Thanks again for watching today's episode of Rome Dispatch. This show is brought to you by donors like Real Estate for Life. If you're looking to buy or sell a home and want to support our mission, visit realestateforlife.org. Again, that's realestateforlife.org. Be sure to tell them Church Militant sent you. God bless.